Can you hear me now? Starting to, a little bit? Well, it is good to see you, even if you can't hear me. It's good to see you guys. Thanks for being here tonight in our series. Hopefully you grabbed some communion elements on your way in. We'll take that toward the end of the service. If you're new with us, our Wednesday nights are a time where we spend some time in worship. We dive deep into Scripture and plow through a lot of passages in the Bible, talk about what this series is in particular. And then at the end, we take communion together. So that's kind of what our night looks like. We are in a series right now called The Bible That Jesus Read, which, as I mentioned early on, I named it that before I entirely knew where we were going to go, because I just thought, well, I want to talk about the Old Testament. And so that's broad enough that we could do anything, really, in the Old Testament. And that's kind of what we're doing in this series. And hopefully, we're on week 7. So if you've missed the first few weeks, please jump online, listen to those, because there will be some things that I'll kind of reference back to, and you might feel a little lost. That's okay, but I think you'll be able to track. This evening, I want to take a little bit of a turn. Last week, we talked about this concept of sacred space in an Israelite mind and what exactly that looked like. Brought some new categories for us. That is modern, post-Enlightenment Westerners. We don't have these categories. And so we had to kind of like lean hard into what does that mean to be ceremonially impure, but it has nothing to do with my morality. And so just things that stretch our minds, which is great. Tonight I want to take a little bit of a turn and look at the concept of, as you know, Jesus has a high view of Scripture. How are we to understand the law? As you might be I've got a friend who's a Jewish follower of Jesus. Culturally, ethnically, he's Jewish. He's a Christian. How does he engage with the Mosaic law? How does a Gentile, I'm a Gentile follower of Jesus, what's my responsibility to the law, and how do I engage with it? So we'll start tonight. This might be like a 2-part, I'm thinking. But oftentimes in my role, just as a pastor here at Timberline, I have people who will email me or approach me really struggling to know, should I observe Mosaic laws that were given at Sinai? And if so, which ones? They're trying to be faithful followers of Jesus and please their Lord. There's a whole movement called, I don't know if you've heard of this, called the Hebrew Roots Movement, HRM, the Hebrew Roots Movement. This is something that's kind of picked up speed. It has been sort of a fringe thing within the Christian community, and these are Gentile Christians who believe that it's incumbent upon followers of Jesus to hold to all of the Sinai commands, as many as are possible anyway, without a temple and so forth. And so really putting it on, like, if you're a faithful follower of Jesus, you have to follow these commands. There's a book that I've been using. It's a new one to me. It's called Reading Moses, Seeing Jesus. 3 Jewish authors. And at the beginning, they bring up this very issue. Let me read for you just like 2 paragraphs of what they say, because I thought it so well underscores the challenge of figuring this out. They write this at the beginning of their book. The early church wrestled with identity issues from a completely different perspective, even different than them as Jews today. Since the Messianic faith was Jewish, the challenge came when Gentiles were added to the early Messianic community. The very first church council, that's Acts chapter 15, dealt with how Gentiles fit into an essentially Jewish faith and culture. They concluded that Gentile believers do not have to keep the law, though many Gentiles Christians today are sincerely wondering whether or not their love for the Jewish Savior ought to be expressed by observing the law. But then what about Jewish believers in Yeshua today? Despite Acts 15, does Acts 15 assume that Jewish believers will continue keeping the law? Paul goes out of his way in Acts 21 to prove once and for all that he lives, quote, in observance of the law. Yeshua declares that, quote, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5. Moses tells us the commandments of the law are eternal. Case closed. Jewish believers in obedience to our Rabbi Yeshua and our teacher Moses, and by following the example of Paul, must obey the law as good and faithful Messianic Jews. And then he concludes with this. Though the logic of the previous paragraph is compelling, we are still faced with big interpretive dilemmas. Why? Because as clear as those passages may seem, other passages in the New Testament lead us to believe that we are no longer under the law. For instance, the Apostle Paul tells us the law was added to earlier promises made by God, not to replace those promises, but simply to guide us as a tutor who will lead us to the Messiah, Galatians 3. And he ends by saying this, now that the Messiah has come, we are, quote, no longer under a guardian, Galatians 3:25. In addition, Paul says, quote, therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food, drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon Sabbath. The writer of Hebrews makes it clear the fact that Yeshua's priesthood necessitates a change in the law since he is not a descendant of Aaron and not even from the priestly tribe of Levi. And then he ends by quoting Hebrews chapter 7, verse 12. For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. So do you feel this? I mean, have you as believers, have you ever felt that tension of like, man, what was the law something like just for one group of people? Was it like okay for a while, but then it was sort of like, okay, now we need a 2.0? Like, how are we to think of God giving this law that was so good, and is it just replaced? But then Jesus says, I haven't come to abolish, I've come to fulfill. You know what I mean? Like, I feel that. And I have felt this sense, this tension of like, how am I to think about this? So what I want to do this morning is think through this issue, and here's my goal. It's easy to find New Testament passages and just sort of say, see here. What I want to do is say, are there things that Moses put into the Torah that would be clues to us about how we should think about what he's writing? And I think there are. I think he sews things in that a careful reader will go, oh, I see. I see what you, Moses, meant. Not some later interpreter. What you, Moses, or any other authors at that time meant. Just real quickly, I don't have the helpful vocabulary in your bulletin, sorry. I know sometimes that's good, and I was too late for the bulletin getting printed. Just two, and these are very, very simple, but I'm using them, I'm delineating them because sometimes I'm sloppy with these, and I almost use them interchangeably and that sort of thing. When we say Torah, T-O-R-A-H, or the Greek word Pentateuch, it refers to the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Okay? That's the Torah. We'll also refer to the Sinai covenant. If you remember, when Israel is delivered out of Egypt, they go out into the desert. If you remember, Moses said to Pharaoh, let my people go that they may go worship me in the desert. So when they do that, they come to Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, and they receive and they enter into a almost marriage-like contract with Yahweh, God. And therefore, a contract covenant is made. And we know the 10 Commandments, right? Like, that's the famous part of them. There's more than that. Jews today count 613 total laws as that are part of the Sinai covenant. So when we refer to the law, when I say the law, I'm thinking of the covenant that they entered into at Mount Sinai. You with me? Okay, and again, I'll try to be careful because sometimes I use terms interchangeably, so I'm going to try to be as careful as I can in this. Okay, as we get going, here's, I think, one way to start getting through the weeds. There is a false assumption that many people make that the Torah, what does that mean? First 5 books. That the Torah is the Sinai covenant. It's a false assumption to think that the Torah, which is really one book, we oftentimes say 5 books, technically it's one book. The Torah, that we falsely assume that is the covenant. And I'm going to suggest to you that it's not. Now, the Torah is about the Sinai covenant, right? It's also about the Abrahamic covenant. It's also about the Noahic covenant. So clearly we're going, this is not simply the covenant. This is a narrative. It involves talking about the Sinai covenant. It's not equivalent to it in total. It's not the covenant document, put it that way. If you have a marriage license, I just did a wedding like 2 weeks ago and had signed a marriage license, send it to the county clerk. That's your marriage license. You get a copy of it, okay? They would have had a covenant contract with Yahweh. That's not the Torah. But the Torah talks about that covenant. Does that make sense? Okay. What is true is that, as I mentioned, the Torah involves the Sinai covenant, but to keep the Torah is not to keep the laws in the Sinai covenant necessarily. Okay, think again, this is why it's important to delineate between these things, but these are oftentimes used interchangeably. Now, why are Moses and any other editors, redactors, people who helped shape the Torah, why were they writing the Torah? What was the purpose of it? And this is really important because how you answer this determines what you think it is and what's going on. Why did they write the Torah? Why did Moses? Let me give you my thesis. I didn't come up with this. A lot of scholars hold of this. But the thesis I want to present to you tonight is he wrote the Torah not as an encouragement to keep the Sinai covenant. Some people say, he wrote it in order to encourage people to keep the Sinai covenant. And I'm going to say, I don't think so. I don't think Moses did for that reason here. Think about this. If this is the Sinai covenant, you guys had better keep this. What story does he begin with in his encouragement, if it's that, to keep the laws? The how many? 613. What story does he say? I know how to start the story, this narrative, as a great way to encourage people to keep the 613 laws. Well, he starts with this story. 2 people, perfect, maybe no belly buttons, who knows? They're in a perfect environment, perfect place, perfect climate, everything's perfect around them, and he gives them one law, just one, right? They fail miserably, and of course, they are exiled, okay? How does that sound as an encouragement that Moses has to encourage the people to keep the 613? Do you see the point? Do you see the disconnect there? Here's the question. Maybe Moses has something else in mind than to write an encouragement to keep the Sinai covenant. In fact, we're actually supposed to see Adam and Eve's account as, if this is Adam and Eve, you're supposed to see them in parallel to Israel. Think about their stories. Adam and Eve's story, it's Israel's story in miniature. What happens to Israel? Let's think about them first. Israel is put into the promised land, right? Canaan. They're given law to obey. They failed, and they're exiled to which direction? To the east, Babylon. That's the Adam and Eve story in major. Think about theirs. They're put into a promised land, a garden, Eden. They're given a command. They fail, and where are they exiled? To the east. And they live their life in exile from the land that was given to them. Do you see the parallels? When Israel reads the first story, they're going, that's us in miniature. That's us. And what they realize is Adam and Eve's seed is now living in exile in Babylon years later. But it's the same story just being played out again and again in the human family and finally in macro. So Adam and Eve's seed, they keep working through the same story. Here's the point. If Moses is writing the Torah to encourage us to keep the law, he's not doing a very good job right off the bat. So here's a big question. Is the purpose of this intro story, at least the first 11 chapters anyway, the fall and man getting spread out and all this stuff and just continuing to blow it, is it written to encourage obedience to the law, or is it to predict Israel's disobedience to the law? Saying this is what's going to keep happening, even with the Sinai covenant. It's predicting this won't end, even under the Sinai covenant. So I'm going to submit to you that I think this intro, it's here to tell us we will disobey. And our hope, it's not in external laws. We can't do sin management, behavior management to fix the root problem. We need another solution, is what the careful reader should be thinking about as they're watching us. Man, we just keep doing this from page 3. We keep doing the same thing. See, if the Sinai law, if the goal of the Torah is just to sort of work harder at doing the Sinai law thing this time, here's a couple questions that I think work against that. Number one, why is the breaking of the law predicted when the law was first introduced, and it's predicted at the end of when the law is introduced? If you read the giving of the law, at the very beginning, Moses predicts, you're not going to do it, you're going to blow it, you're going to go into exile. When he's all done giving it, he goes, you're not going to do it, you're going to blow it, you're going to go into exile. That's what he says here. The giving of the law both begins and ends with a recognition that they will fall and go into exile. Let me show you those two passages. And these are bookends. Let's see here. Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 30, Moses has just received from God this, okay, are you ready to give him my law? But before he does it, he goes, oh, by the way, here are all the cursings and blessings that will be attached to the law. So he's just given all those, okay? Deuteronomy chapter 30, this is the beginning of giving the law. And when all these things come upon you, the curses, so it's assuming it's going to happen, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you. Wait a minute, where are they going to be? They're going to be in exile. When you're among the nations and you're there because I've sent you there. And return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice and all that I command you with all your heart, with all your soul. And then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you, gather you back to your peoples where you've been scattered. Okay, that's before they even sign on the dotted line. And then you go to the end of the giving of the law, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 16 through 20. So he just gets done presenting this. And Yahweh said to Moses, behold, You were about to lie down with your fathers. Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. He's going to die. Then this people will rise and they will whore after the foreign gods among them in the land that they are entering. And they will forsake me and break my covenant that I have made with them. Then my anger will be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them and hide my face from them, and they will be devoured. And many evils and troubles will come upon them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil that they have done, because they have turned to other gods. And he says something kind of interesting. Therefore, I want you to write a song. And I want you to teach this song to the people. How many of you guys know songs from when you were a kid that were on the radio? If it pops up, you could start singing right away. Something about that. Teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the people of Israel. For when I have brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to give to their fathers, and they have eaten and are full and grown fat, they will turn to other gods and serve them, and despise me and break my covenant. And when many evils and troubles have come upon them, this song shall confront them as a witness, for it will live unforgotten in the mouths of their offspring. And then he teaches Moses this long song. You ever been somewhere and all of a sudden lyrics to a song spring into your mind, maybe where you are, what you're doing? That's what he's doing with them. You're going to teach this for generations and generations. And the song is all about our covenant. We made this promise, and when it doesn't happen, here's what's going to happen. And they'll be sitting in exile somewhere, and the Holy Spirit will bring to memory in their minds the song that God taught Moses and that he taught us. And then if you want to read that song sometime, just go to the next chapter, Deuteronomy 32, verses 1 through 43. It's a long song. See if you can memorize it. I don't know. But it's this long song that encapsulates what is going to happen to them. But at the very end of the song, there is something that's kind of cool where it's got this moment of, but there's still hope of redemption. And not just for you, Israel, the nations. You're going to be with the nations one day serving me. So it's this hope at the end of the song. Okay, so like I said, the first sort of problem with saying the reason Moses wrote the Torah was that it was an encouragement to obey the Sinai covenant. Well, the first thing of that is, then why did he not only begin his whole story with an example of failure, but when he gave the covenant, he bookended at the beginning and the end with, you're going to fail, you're going to blow it, right? Third thing, if the Sinai law has the goal, or rather, I guess I should say, if the Sinai law is the goal of the Torah, why does the giving of the law introduce death? What I mean is this. Before the law was, I've got like a little mini chart here. I wish I could show it to you, but I don't have it on the screen. It has a list of the sin before the law, after the law. You with me? It's kind of what it looks like. So, for instance, the sin of violating Sabbath. In Exodus 16, there's no law yet. When they break it, no one dies. But you jump over to Numbers 15, the law's been given. Break the Sabbath, they're stoned to death. What has the law introduced? Consequences, right? Another example, longing for Egypt. Exodus 16, nothing happens when they do it. Numbers 11, death. Wish to die in Egypt. They do it before the law. Exodus 16 again, nothing happens to them. But in Numbers 14, death penalty. Grumbling against Moses. Don't you wish you had that for your kids? No. Grumbling against Moses before the law. It's bad. Nothing happened, though. No consequences. Numbers chapter 16, death penalty. Do you see the point? What did the Sinai covenant introduce? Death as well. See, the Torah is Moses' version of like Romans. It's Moses' version of Galatians. Both those books, they say the law was good. It was righteous. It was holy. But you know what it did? It introduced death. If you remember from our Sacred Space week, we talked about the reason you can't be in an impure condition and go into God's space, because God is not a God of death. He's a God of life. He's a God of wholeness. Paul's theology, I would suggest to you, comes right out of the Torah. When he writes in Galatians and in Romans and all these books that we're more familiar with, where is he getting this idea of our relationship to the law, and it's good, it's holy, but it brings death? He's getting it from Moses, because he reads a lot of Moses. If you read the Torah, not primarily as a law book, but if you read it as Moses' narrative to show what's going on with not just Israel, but the nations, and see that it's actually going somewhere. It's pointing to something. It'll actually lead you to the New Testament. Moses' encouragement to say, I want you to follow God. Here's what he's getting us. But there are things, seeds, planted into the Sinai covenant that are going to point you past it at some point. You can't control that. It's not when you want. God's going to do something to get you past that. Let me just go to a couple places in the New Testament where New Testament authors they're making this connection. Anyway, Romans chapter 4, starting in verse 15, we read this. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. Or 2 Corinthians 3, 6, and 7, he writes, God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. So that's the distinction he's making. The old covenant, it was of the letter. This one's of the Spirit. For the letter kills. The Spirit gives life. And then there's this great passage, is one of my favorites. Romans chapter 10, verses 3 and 4. He says, for being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, this is speaking of Israel, they did not submit to God's righteousness. They couldn't do the Sinai covenant, you guys. For Christ, he's the end, or you might say the point, the goal, the bullseye of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. So let me kind of give you some summary points and then take a little turn here of what we've seen so far. If the introduction and conclusion of the Torah predict disobedience, broken covenant, and exile, and if we see the introduction of death once the law was given, is it reasonable that Moses' goal in this massive narrative that he's writing is to bring us to Mount Sinai? Isn't it more reasonable that the Torah's goal is to bring us past this failed future of Israel to a place of hope? Not just for Israel, but again, as we said, for all the nations as well. See, the Torah's primary goal, it's to point beyond itself. When you're driving down the road and you come across a sign and it has like a little black arrow that's maybe going like this, what is it referring to? What should you think about? A turn in the road, okay? If you just stare at the sign, you're going to go right off the road, right? The sign is communicating something to you, but it's pointing beyond itself to something further down the road. And what I would suggest to you is what I believe, I'm convinced of this, what Moses has in mind when he says, I'm going to write a story, I'm going to write a narrative about my people's history of entering into a covenant happened at Mount Sinai. We got out of exile, entered this covenant and blew it, and I know I'm going to write a narrative about that. And the narrative is going to make people see these principles and go, man, so what's the solution? These are all good laws, but we can't obey them. We keep messing up. What's going on? I think it's pointing beyond itself to a new kind of covenant where the law, again, it's all good stuff, it's written, but remember, it's not written on stone tablets, some of the authors say. Your stone heart is replaced with a heart of flesh, and he says, and I'll write it on your heart. You're like, oh, that's like internalized law, as opposed to just looking on a list and trying to conform to an external ones. I also, another thing that I think is helpful in thinking about this is the Torah, the structure of it, is actually thinking about the future. It's not thinking about its own time. Let me give you these examples here. There's a key phrase. It's only used 4 times in the entire Old Testament. And the phrase is, in the last days. In the last days. It's only used 4 times. It kind of comes like this. There are, do you guys like musicals? Anyone like musicals in here? Okay, some people. If my wife were here today, she loves musicals. And it's always like, I got rhythm, what's it, music? I got my gal who could ask for anything more. I hate that song. That song's horrible. I could ask for a better song than that. I like Les Mis. That's one of the few that I really, really like. But if you know anything about a musical, when do the songs come? A song comes at either a key turning point in the story, maybe something has just happened and it's monumental. And the characters, they burst out in song. They're not just randomly placed. You with me? A song in a musical comes at either like a key turning point or some time where like it's an important juncture, maybe. So this phrase, in the last days, like I said, it's 4 times mentioned. 3 of them are thrown into musical moments, poems, or songs. And I want you to, so these things are all talking about in the last days, future pointing, and look at the things it brings up. Let me show you some of these here. Genesis 49, this is Jacob blessing his sons. Genesis 49, we read, then Jacob called his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in, now this is the ESV, it says, in days to come. It's literally in Hebrew, the last days, this phrase. And then he says some things here. Down in verse 10, okay, so this is what he's singing about. He's talking about the last days. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So when he thinks about in the last days, there's going to come some ruler who's going to be the top dog, right? Second time that this phrase is used in the Old Testament. Do you remember when Israel, this is in the book of Numbers, Israel is traveling to the promised land, and there's always bad guys out there, like attacking them and stuff. Well, one group of bad guys hires a prophet and says, I'll pay you money if you curse the Israelites. I hate the Israelites. And as they're coming by, I want you to stand over them as they're passing, and I want you to pronounce a curse on them by divine powers. And so Balaam, this guy, stands up on this rock, and as they're walking by, every time he attempts to open his mouth to curse, God changes his tongue, won't let it, and he only says blessings. And the king's standing right there, and he's like, hey, I paid you. And he's like, okay, I can do it this time. Every time he tries it, he just pronounces blessing. And he's like, I have no control over what I'm saying. And what you realize is Yahweh saying, no, I'm not going to allow that my people will be blessed. This is a poem. This is one of those musical songs, just like Jacob's was. Numbers chapter 24, starting in verse 14, we read this. And now, behold, I'm going to my people. Come, I will let you know what this people will do to your people in, it says the latter days. It's again, literally, it's the last days. And then if you jump down to verse 17, it's a great kind of poetic moment here. Verse 17, he says, I see him, but not now. So this is future. I behold him, but he's not near. A star, that's an image of ruler. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter, we just read about that in the previous song. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. Okay? Last days, future, ruler, scepter. Let's go to the last of the three. This is the Song of Moses. Remember that? Remember the song he gave him? He said, I want you to teach everyone this. How will we read this? Deuteronomy 31, starting in verse 29. For I know that after my death you will surely act corruptly and turn aside from, this is Moses speaking to the Israelites, the way I've commanded you. And this is literally, in the last days evil will befall you, because you will do what is evil in the sight of Yahweh, provoking him to anger through the work of your hands. And then if we jump over to 33:7, this is a long song. Chapter 33, verse 7. We read this. And this he said of Judah, hear, O Yahweh, the voice of Judah, and bring him into his people with your hands content for him, and be a help against his adversaries. If you remember, Judah is the one through whom this ruler is going to come. It has to be the future. As Balaam says, I see him, but not yet. He's far off in the future, but he's going to be that ruler in this future day. This is what the author of Hebrews picks up on. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. This is how the book of Hebrews starts. And if you've ever read the book of Hebrews, it's just grabbing stuff from the Old Testament. He says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us through his son. This, Christians oftentimes ask questions like, are we in the last days? Yeah. Like for 2,000 years, we've been in the last days. The coming of Jesus marked the beginning of the last days. That's what Moses had in mind. That's what the prophets had in mind. That one day when this new covenant comes, these are the last days in which this new ruler is going to come. And then the Torah's conclusion to the promises. This is kind of interesting. Toward the end of the giving of the Torah, we read this. Remember, Moses isn't coming in. Moses is going to die, so he won't be with them. But there's hope about the last days. It says this, Deuteronomy, what am I in here? Can't read it, I'm so small. Deuteronomy 18:15. Yahweh your God will raise up for you a prophet like me, Moses says, from among you, from your brothers. It is him you shall listen. It is to him that you shall listen. That's what Moses says, but look at the phrase, look at the statement that's made at the end of the book. We read in Deuteronomy chapter 30. Is that where I am? 34. Go back to 30, Deuteronomy chapter 30 and in verse 6. No. That was right. Sorry. I've got too many passages up here. It gets confusing. Deuteronomy 34, verse 10. Here we go. Okay. So what did Moses just promise? Israel, one day God would raise up a prophet like Moses from among the people. But then the book ends this way. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses. So do you see the... Don't worry, guys. God's going to raise up a prophet. It'll be in the last days. He'll be like me. And then the book ends, and it's like, didn't happen. The whole Torah, it's looking beyond itself. The whole thing. Moses is constantly looking past something in the future that his narrative, the Torah, is all about. It's all pointing, it's all, in that sense, I'll use kind of a big theological word, it's eschatological. Eschatology is future stuff. This is eschatological. It's those end times that he has in mind here. The point is, some people would argue that the purpose of the Torah, it's primarily law, and I think that misses it. I think that misses the point of what Moses had in mind when he said, I'm going to write an epic narrative. And when there were other editors and redactors who helped and all that sort of thing. But I believe it is looking beyond itself. Let me make one other observation here. The Torah provides hope, yes, for Israel, which that kind of seems obvious, but also for the nations. And this is kind of an interesting, if you go back to Genesis chapter, Genesis chapter 12, verse 2. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me something else popped in my head. Let me show you this first. This is kind of cool. Okay, so I mentioned that Moses says, God's going to raise up another prophet like me. We get to the end of the book. It says, none have happened yet. The gospel author of Matthew, if you ever read a commentary on the gospel author of Matthew, they'll point out that Matthew is constantly doing things to make it look like Jesus is the new Moses. In his book is broken up into 5 sections. You're like, oh, the Torah has 5 parts, and that sort of thing. There's even this one little neat way that it even frames Jesus' teaching. Listen to Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. Think of Moses, okay? Seeing the crowds, he went up on a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. I mean, do you just see the picture, the way he's framing it? He goes up on a mountain, and you're like, oh, it's kind of sounds like that Moses guy. Remember, he went up on the mountain, and he brought the covenant to us. Matthew does this 100 times throughout he just drops in little pieces. He's like telegraphing. This is the one who's like unto Moses. This is the guy. Okay, let's go to the, not just Israel, but the nations. If you remember way back in Genesis when God makes a covenant with Abraham, when he calls Abraham, in the initial promise to Abraham, he says, I will make you a great nation. This is Genesis 12:2. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And here's sort of the key part. In you, all the families of the earth, the ones that I have disinherited, shall be blessed. When we go to Deuteronomy, make this one larger. Deuteronomy chapter 32. There's this interesting statement. This is, near like that song of Moses and everything. Call for songs of joy, O nations, concerning his people. For the blood of his servants will avenge, and he will take reprisals against his foes, and he will make atonement for his land, his people. But what's interesting is, who are these nations? Call for songs of joy, nations, concerning his people. The whole Old Testament it's like Israel against the nations. It's Yahweh against the gods of the nations. But there's this hope, even in Moses' song, the nations will actually be a part of this. commentators point out, this is maybe a little technical, but I think it's kind of cool, this call for songs of joy, O nations, concerning his people. A lot of commentators point out that this can be translated, call for songs of joy, or call for songs and make his people rejoice. Nations sing that his people might rejoice. Does that sound like anything to you? Gentiles do something so that Hebrews can find joy, is what he's saying here. Who are these Gentiles? Well, let's go to Deuteronomy 32:43. Deuteronomy, or actually, 21. This is so interesting. Now think Paul. This is where Paul gets his theology. God's mad because his people have gotten other gods, and he said, you've gone after other gods, and so you've made me jealous. Okay? They have made me jealous with what is no God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. Okay, listen to this. So I will make them jealous. How's he going to do that? I'm going to go after those who are no people. No people is a typical Hebrew phrase to refer to the nations. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation, those dumb Gentiles. I'm going to go get some of those dumb Gentiles, and I'm going to make them my people. And then my actual people will become jealous. New Testament, does that sound like anything? Romans chapter 15, verse 10. And again it is said, rejoice, O Gentiles, with his peoples. And again, praise the Lord, all you Gentiles, and extol him. Paul makes the argument. He says, I don't have it here. Paul makes this argument. He says, my people, their hearts have been hardened for a while, but they will become jealous because of the Gentiles will become my people. And he says, and eventually all Israel will be saved. He said, I'm going to use the Gentiles to make my people, the Hebrews, go, that doesn't seem right. It's like they're worshiping our God. I want that. And he said, yeah, I'm going to use that to bring them back into the fold. The Torah, it's not just a law book. In fact, it's not a law book. It contains laws. The Torah is not a law book. It's Moses' narrative that tells of the past in order to prepare us for the future. It's pointing beyond itself. It's pointing to something else. It's pointing to something that is not mere exterior modification, but heart change. Law becomes internalized, and there's a future king who will come in the last days, who will inaugurate it. Like you see, this is Moses. This is Moses. The Torah's story prepares us for a better covenant. Prepares us for a better covenant mediator. Prepares us for better priests. Prepares us for a perfect Adam, what Paul calls the second Adam. That it would happen in these last days. I would suggest the Torah's goal, it's messianic. This Messiah stuff is not being made up even by the prophets later. It's not being made up by New Testament authors. They're reaching back into Torah. They're finding these seeds planted there and bringing them in. I just want to read these last two passages to you from the New Testament. John chapter 5, starting in verse 45. This is Jesus speaking to the religious leaders. Do not think that I will accuse you to my Father. There is one who accuses you. Who's that? Moses, on whom you have set your hope. For if you believed Moses, like if you really believed him, you would believe me. For he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? He's saying there's continuity, you guys. The words that Moses had, those were my words. And then finally, Romans chapter 10, starting in verse 4, what we read earlier. Romans 10:4. For Christ, Paul says, he is the end, he's the point of the law in order to actually gain true, authentic righteousness, not just behavior, moderation, or conformity, to everyone who believes. We're at least getting in the right direction of figuring this, like what's the law thing and what's going on there. Now, you might think to yourself, but what about the 613 laws? Should I maintain purity laws? Should I maintain Sabbath laws? What about feast laws? What about those tassels you're supposed to put on your clothing? What about the 2 different kinds of fabric? Can I do that? If my brother dies and his wife doesn't have any children, do I still have to sleep with her to give her kids so that his name carries on? These are the 613 laws. How do we keep these laws? Well, that's what we'll jump into next week. Okay? Hey, I want to transition to a time of communion. If you miss the elements, please feel free to get up and go grab those. But during this next song that Tyler is going to lead us in, I want you to take some time, and especially even just based on all the, we've been jumping around in different passages and thinking about God prompting this guy Moses to start writing this epic narrative about something that would point to something in the future with a ruler, and all these different tributaries would come together, and he would create a new covenant and give us new hearts. And then he said, the picture of me doing that is my body broken for you. And I want you to take a piece of bread, and I want you to eat that, and I want you to think about that. He said, and it's my blood shed, because there's no covenant made without shedding of blood. He goes, I want you to take the juice, and I want you to consume that. And I want you to think about it. All led to a point in time, and you're the beneficiary of that point. And we're living in those last days when the new king came and now resides through his Spirit in each and every one of us. So during this song, meditate, ask the Lord to speak to you. And after this song, I want us to all take the elements together.